It's episode 5 of Objectionable already. Can you even believe it? Hopefully you know the drill by now. Me, Barrister, videos are clips from TV and films to do with law. Score is a score out of 10 for legal accuracy. And, by the way, viewers, the logo has a gavel in it because courts in England and Wales don't use them, but every filmmaker seems to think that they do. With that in mind, let's get going on an episode that could be called When British TV Goes Bad. First up, it's EastEnders. This is little Benji Bob's Mitchell, son of Phil Mitchell. And if you don't know the Mitchells, they're the Bruiser family of Walford. Yeah. And Ben is the youngest. Well, at the time this was made, anyway. Here, Ben is appearing in court for sentencing for GBH with intent and for perverting the course of justice. The history is soap opera complicated, but Ben was a victim of abuse by his dad's girlfriend, Stella. He then goes a bit wonky. Then his half-sister turns up and she tries to out him as gay. He retaliates by burning her in the same way that he was burned by the evil would-be stepmother. She blames another of Ben's mates, called Jordan, so that she isn't in trouble for spitefully trying to out Ben. Then Dad finds out that Ben actually did it and punches his son. Then Ben says that he's acting this way because Jordan is bullying him. Dad tells him to fight back, so Ben attacks Jordan with a wrench and gives him a fractured skull. That's your GBH with intent. The perverting the course of justice charge escapes me at the moment, but I think it was something to do with leading the police on a merry dance with the weapon used somehow. We find ourselves in what looks like a youth court, a specialist adjunct of the magistrates' courts, where all criminal cases begin and the less serious stay. That's certainly where it should be. So far, so good, as Ben is something like 15 at this point. Things are more complicated if charged with an adult or in a couple of other limited circumstances, but you didn't come here for a chapter and verse, I'm sure.
Can you sit with me?
No, I'm sorry.
Can he sit with me, Ben asks. Well, due to his age, he must be accompanied by a parent, guardian, or appropriate alternative. They don't get a speaking role and stay sat down. The family's go-to solicitor, whose name I forget at the moment, says no, and in the dock he goes. Assisted by the usher. That is unwarranted touching and is not something any usher would do in a youth court or any court where a defendant is appearing on bail. The whole family are there. Even Barbara Windsor, the Carry On film icon, as Peggy Mitchell. Get out of my pub! This packed public gallery is pretty unlikely to be allowed. The public are excluded from the youth courts. They may be family, mostly, but they're not directly involved. They could wait outside and support Ben until his case is called on, but that's about it.
Ben, listen to me. It's 6 weeks. That's all it is. It's just 6 weeks. You can do this.
Dad, Phil, tries to reassure Ben that he's going to get 6 weeks. Spoilers, he doesn't. But I'll come back to the sentence in a bit.
The judge is about to come in. You have to sit down. Benson. Be strong, mate. Please, be strong.
All right.
Now it's time to meet the judgy. Oh, what's going on here, though? Firstly, youth courts are presided over by 3 magistrates who have a youth ticket, as we call it, or by a district judge. Here we have the latter, we must assume. But the wardrobe department has malfunctioned. This outfit is very, very wrong.
Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Mitchell is not what would be said there. The convention in a youth court is for the first names to be used, so the whole idea is to make them easier to understand and less formal. In a youth court, strictly speaking, the district judge or magistrates are supposed to be seated at the same level as the defendant. It's not always possible due to old court designs, but it is worth mentioning.
Grievous bodily harm with intent and perverting the course of justice contrary to the common law are 2 extremely serious offences which cannot be treated lightly by this court. In mitigation, you have pleaded guilty to these charges, which means I am bound to reduce any sentence by 1/3.
A reduction of 1/3 means first opportunity at court, and it's automatic. The sentencing remarks here are grossly inadequate, but it's a soap opera, not a documentary. We didn't even hear any mitigation.
I therefore sentence you to a 15-month detention and training order.
What?
reduced to 10 months, of which 5 months will be served in custody in a young offenders institution.
Okay, Ben must have been between 15 and 17 at this point, based upon that sentence, because the custodial part of the order will be in a young offenders institution, or YOI. A detention and training order is an order only available for youths. The longest DTO you can have is 24 months, and half is spent in the Young Offenders Institution. The other half is spent in the community with supervision and requirements from the Youth Justice Team for that area.
5 months.
Escort the prisoner to the cells.
The court must have regard to the principal aim of the youth justice system, which is to prevent offending by children and young people and the welfare of the child. That's not always how it seems, mind. Children are routinely locked up in England and Wales, and recidivism rates are high. It isn't working, but there's a lot of money for private companies in youth justice, and votes for parties who tackle the hoodies, yobbos, oiks, ne'er-do-wells, and, okay, I'll stop channeling my inner Suella Braverman.
All rise.
5 months?
Dad.
You said 6 weeks, 5 months?
Anyway, the sentence is unlawful too. DTOs are only available in durations of 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 18 and 24 months. So, to give 10 months after credit would be an unlawful starting point of 15 months. If the case wasn't worth more than 15 months, the only option would have been a starting point of 12 months, and then a third off that would have been 8 months. So the sentence should have been an 8-month DTO with 4 months to serve and the rest in the community. Well, I say that, I'm being pedantic. So at the time that this sentence was passed in 2010, that absolutely was the law. But the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 changed the law so that now a DTO can be passed for any duration between 4 months and 24 months. But it was still unlawful at the time that this was made.
It's all right, Ben. Get the change. I'll get the change here. Listen, this is his first offence. 5 months, you won't last 5 days in there.
You want a contempt order, can't you?
See, everybody is shocked. So, bad expectation management from the advocate there. And no, Phil, you won't get them to change it, I'm afraid. But we do learn it was Ben's first offence, so a DTO really may not have been the right choice, even for these relatively serious offences. Let's get to the score. Oh, EastEnders, how can I count the ways in which thou art wrong? Well, actually, by giving you a verdict of 2 out of 10. What's that? You're not our legal advisor? Yes, I am! This clip is from Series 2 of ITV drama The Jury. This is the trial of Alan Lane. It's a retrial following successful appeal against conviction for Mr. Lane, and he's accused of having murdered 3 women he met through an internet dating site. Emma Watts, QC, as was KC now of course, was played by the tremendous Julie Walters. And here she is, cross-examining Commander Howson. That's the Met's equivalent of an assistant chief constable to us provincial folk. He was in charge of the investigation. Sometimes we call them the OIC, or Officer in Charge, or Officer in the Case.
You said that Lane was the only common denominator between the 3 victims.
No, that's not what I said. I believe if you check the record, I said the clearest.
That's an interesting one. Barristers must not mislead a jury, and it's also easy to lose the honest guide impression by misquoting a witness. Here's an example of Miss Watts of Queen's Counsel simply doing that for effect, to prompt the witness to make the distinction between only and clearest that she is now going to exploit.
So you are aware that there were other men who had enjoyed communication with all 3 victims?
I am aware there were 1 or 2.
Well, as it happens, there were 6. And among them, one Thomas Dent.
Now, without having the show fresh in my mind, I cannot remember, but Thomas Dent was presumably mentioned in the first 2 episodes as a potential wrong-un.
Does the name mean anything to you?
Of course.
Then you will be aware that not only did he have extensive email and telephone contact with all 3 of the women, but he also had a history of domestic violence, substance abuse, and mental instability.
This cutaway to Mr. Dent being a wrong-un is the classic trope of whodunit TV, isn't it? On another note, what is being put to the officer here is what we call non-defendant bad character. That must have been agreed into evidence between the prosecution and defence prior to the scene we're seeing, one must imagine.
But perhaps more significantly, he was known to police as someone who had regularly visited dogging sites.
Mr. Dent obviously isn't frightened of poppers-induced nosebleeds, it seems.
It's especially relevant in this case, as the woodland where the third victim was murdered, Huntley Common, is a known dogging site.
I should point out that this is turning into something of a speech for Watts. Whilst that's sometimes a good narrative choice for television, what one might be likely to do in court, to avoid getting interrupted by the old sweetheart on the bench, is to put each of these facts about Mr. Dent one by one to the witness. Really allow the jury to process what the copper knew and just how shocking it all was.
Well, I can assure you Mr. Dent was thoroughly investigated.
Apparently not thoroughly enough. Because nowhere in your report or charge did you make the connection that all three victims had shown an interest in or had histories of sexual exhibitionism.
This is a little tricky. The sexual interests of victims is not, contrary to tabloid and lobby group stories, traditionally deployed casually in trials. Here, though, it seems like it may have been allowed in the context. My slight problem is the line from Watts, "Nowhere in your report or in your charge was this fact." Well, no, it wouldn't be likely to appear in his report, by which I presume she's referring to his witness statements, or to a report generated by an appeal against conviction. But in your charge, that makes little sense. The charge is murder, the particulars of which do not contain a biography of the sexual interests of the deceased. They contain a name and a location, sure, but dogging is as likely to appear in a charge's wording as is the fact that the victim was partial to a glass of Whitley's rhubarb and ginger gin. There is a sponsorship available for this show. Just saying, Whitley's, just move on. Right, okay.
I'm sure my officers were perfectly aware.
Well, if they were aware, Commander, then it follows that you would be able to provide the court with the name of the website where all three women communicated most frequently with Mr. Dent.
I'm quite sure I can.
No. Let me spare your blushes.
Let me spare your blushes is a cute line. Most of us have deployed something similar at one point or another in trials, though Walters does it rather nicely here. What she means is that the website either doesn't appear in the unused material for the investigation, or that it does, and so the oversight about Mr. Dent as a strong suspect was incompetence or indeed worse.
MischiefMatch.com is the name of the site where the victims all met Thomas Dent. Yet there is barely mention of him in your police report. Why is that?
We ruled him out. And anyway, if he is such a compelling suspect, why don't you summon him?
Well, firstly, you mean summons, officer, but anyway, go on, have a guess why not. Okay, I'll let Julie tell you. But just before I do, Julie, hold on. The officer says he was ruled out and gives no explanation for it, and Watts of Queen's Counsel did ask the risky but right question, why is that, officer? What Commander Howson does then is cheeky. He asks counsel a question. That tends to lead to the response, the way this works is that I ask you questions and you answer them, not the other way around. But here, the question from Howson is stupid. It isn't for the defence to summons a person who they think done it. From the sounds of it, there is a disclosure problem here too.
Because he's dead, Commander. He took his own life. He was found hanging from a doorway in his apartment less than 2 months after the death of Rebecca Chung. His computer, at the time of death, was still logged on to MischiefMatch.com. In the light of all of this, Commander Howson, do you still feel 100% certain that you arrested the right man?
Absolutely.
When he's presented with very compelling, albeit circumstantial evidence that points to a likely better suspect, the correct answer is to review the situation. He may well have replied, for example, I may accept that Mr. Dent's circumstances were of interest to the investigation, however the preponderance of the evidence, whatever that actually was in this case, still provided sufficient for the full test to be applied by the Crown Prosecution Service to authorise Mr. Lane's charge. Having the overview of all of the investigation, my certainty has not changed, but ultimately, that's a matter for the jury, not you or I, Miss Watts. I mean, I've never heard a copper say anything like that, but it's, something he could have said.
Really? Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Watts. 2 o'clock.
The thing is about this case, Mr. Dent may have been a very dodgy character with connections to the victims, but the evidence against Lane may well have been pretty overwhelming. We just don't know from this clip. Well, I know from the show, but I'm not going to ruin it for you because it's one that's available to stream and it's a damn good show. Plus, you don't have to watch Series 1 to do Series 2 because they're completely unrelated. Anyway, on to a verdict. Well, do you know what? The sun's out, I love Julie Walters, and I'm feeling kind of generous. So, despite the problems, this is actually a 7 from me. Clip 3 now. This is from Bank of Dave. I didn't watch this, but producer Mark has given me some context, and so has Wikipedia. The film is based on the real-life experiences of Dave Fishwick. It follows the story of a Burnley working-class and self-made millionaire who struggles to set up a community bank to help the town's local businesses to thrive. To do so, he must battle London's elite financial institutions and compete for the first banking licence in over 100 years. This is where he is on trial for unlicensed lending, hence the Bank of Dave. I'm going to guess that the banks didn't like it.
You, Mr. Stockwell, Mr. Fishwick. All of this is very impressive. And you are to be congratulated, Mr. Fishwick, for all you have done for our community. Whilst there is no question that the law has indeed been broken, your argument that the prosecution was malicious is compelling.
You're going to need some background here, I'm afraid. In this British film, it is said that Dave's defence is malicious prosecution. That makes no sense. Malicious prosecution is a civil wrong, which lawyers call a tort, and it would be for Dave bringing that action after winning a criminal trial, most likely. If anything, this would have been an application by Dave to bring an end to the prosecution by proving it to be an abuse of the court's process. To win such an application, it would be for the defendant to prove to the court that one of these questions can be answered with a yes. Is it impossible for the defendant to have a fair trial? The first ground for abuse of process, right to a fair trial. Is a stay of proceedings necessary to protect the integrity of the criminal justice system? The second ground, integrity of the justice system. It's up to the prosecution, not the court, to decide who can be prosecuted, and the courts will not interfere with that very readily. Fun fact though, prior to 2021, magistrates could only stay proceedings under that first limb, but since Mansfield v DPP 2021, some cases under the second limb can be dealt with now by magistrates. If this were a private prosecution, which it wasn't in the film, it's one of those types of cases, as the allegation is that it is a bad faith prosecution.
However, in order for us to throw this case out, we need proof, beyond reasonable doubt, that the banks were indeed behind it.
OK, the magistrate says beyond reasonable doubt is the standard of proof. For abuse of process, it is on the balance of probabilities, i.e. more likely than not. The law has been broken, by the way. Lending money without a licence in the way that Dave did is illegal, and he admitted in the film having done so.
Do you have this proof?
I do not.
In which case, unfortunately...
Oh no, there's a gavel. This magistrate is clearly also an auctioneer.
Perhaps the prosecution has what you're looking for.
Excuse me?
When you were given this case, surely the police gave you all the details about where the complaint originated. That's standard procedure, isn't it?
Oh, in this case, no. I don't have those details.
You don't?
No.
I could get into the duties of disclosure here, but it's utterly academic given that everything else in this clip is utter nonsense. What makes it worse is that none of this part actually happened. There was no trial or criminal charge, just endless attempts to get a licence that he eventually never got. Oh well, let's enjoy the silly.
Seems odd. A Okay, so let me get this clear. An anonymous tip.
This is that bit in a trial or application or whatever this is actually supposed to be, where the lawyers just have a little chat in open court, you know, like you do. Oh, lordy.
The kind that causes a team to be sent all the way from London to arrest someone for filling out the wrong form.
Okay, so not a private prosecution then.
And I have no idea what you want from me.
Well, I'd like the truth, if possible.
You can't handle the truth!
Your Honour, this is outrageous.
Your Honour, it's a magistrate, not a circuit judge. So traditionally, your worship or your worships, if you're talking to all of them, or equally acceptable now, sir, if you're just addressing the chair.
I'm not on trial here.
Well, perhaps you should be. This is a court of law, sir. If you lie in here, it's called perjury.
Lying on oath may be perjury. Lying about disclosure may be various things, but not perjury because he's not on oath. Also, if these two are both barristers, accusing another member of the bar of lying to the court is very serious. If you cannot prove that allegation, that is your career over.
Mr. Stockwell.
Apologies, Your Honour. Very well. Then, as my next witness, I'd like to call a senior officer from the Bolton Police Force. This individual has first-hand knowledge of the case and will confirm that the original complaint came from the office of Sir Charles Denbigh.
What's this now? He's calling another witness after submissions and a concession that he has no proof of the thing with the... I give up.
Formerly of the Financial Regulations Board. He is one of the most senior bankers in the country, and the prosecution is fully aware of his role in the case, but regrettably has chosen to lie about it.
May I approach the bench?
No, you may not approach the bench, as that isn't something we do.
No.
I was asked to keep his name out of it.
Asked by whom?
I'm not at liberty to say.
We will not accept this kind of subterfuge and obfuscation in this courtroom.
Your Honour.
No, enough. You were on very thin ice.
Your Honour, seeing as the prosecution has admitted perjury, I think a mistrial is in order.
I can do better than that, Mr. Stockwell. Case dismissed.
Clapping and merriment. You don't see that very often in a courtroom. Anyway, thank God that's over. I'll even tolerate the gavel just to end it. But this train wreck is getting 0 out of 10 because I literally can't give them a minus score and can't think of a single thing in it that's right.
Is that it? Go on.
Get in!
Which brings us to the verdict for Bank of Dave, which will be unsurprising when I tell you that it's 0, a big round 0, because that's how much of this they got right. Let's move on. Clip 4. This looks grim. It must be Corrie. We must note that the original legal advisor for Corrie passed away not long before this episode, I think, so that might explain a lot. Okay, I know a few actors from Coronation Street. I live up the road from where they filmed Corrie. I once shared a pint with 2 Corrie actors when they were literally hiding from Paps, but I don't watch the show. This clip apparently is about Justin Rutherford. He faced trial after leaving Ryan Connor with life-changing injuries from an acid attack on Ryan Connor in The Rover's Return. It was acid intended for his stalking victim, though, Daisy Midgley. This appears to be a hearing in the magistrate's court before a district judge because of what she's wearing, the layout of the court, and the fact that this is apparently the first time he appears in court, and, as you know, all criminal cases start in the magistrate's court.
Justin Rutherford, please stand.
By the way, those of you who spot the book on her desk, that is a real book. It's just not one that a court would ever have on a desk.
Confirm your name and date of birth.
But for some reason, there's no court clerk, and so the district judge is a one-woman show. This does not happen. But she's putting in a shift and asking all the particulars of the defendant.
Justin Rutherford, 10th of November, 1994.
This is your plea and trial preparation hearing.
Oh, we're on strike one. A PTPH, as we call them, plea and trial preparation hearing, is the first hearing in the Crown Court, not the Magistrates' Court. So, wrong judge, wrong court layout, and the defendant is being placed in the witness box, not the dock, for some reason. Nope, not many lawyers in sight either so far. It makes it even weirder that the judge is doing everything herself as well.
You face an indictment containing 1 count of wounding, causing grievous bodily harm with intent, and 1 count of possession of an offensive weapon, namely sulphuric acid, under Section 1 of the Prevention of Crime Act 1953. The particulars of this indictment are that on the 27th of March 2023, you attacked Daisy Midgley with sulphuric acid, and in the process inflicted grievous bodily harm upon another second victim, Ryan Connor.
Wounding or GBH with intent. She reads those like they're not the same offence, then reads no particulars, then goes straight to the second count, i.e. possession of an offensive weapon, but then she goes on to give particulars for both offences in one go, and then she gets the particulars wrong. You see, particulars of an offence on the indictment are important and are worded in very specific ways. What she reads are more like a layman's description of the offences.
How do you plead?
Not guilty.
He then pleads not guilty. Seeing as we are pretending that this is the Crown Court and this is a PTPH and not a first appearance in the Magistrates' Court, we'll play along. Following a not guilty plea, a timetable is set, starting with finding a trial date for however many days the trial is thought likely to last. That's something counsel will have told the court, and they may have obtained a date already before the hearing started. But here we have no lawyers and we don't get to see any more of the hearing. I guess the drama was in him pleading not guilty. Although he would probably have indicated that in the lower court, Magistrates' Court in real life, and so there would have been very little drama in the Crown Court, and the complainants very rarely attend PTPHs, partly for that reason. So that's quite a lot that's wrong. It's not as absurd as an earlier clip in this particular show, but it's just as wrong. Verdict time, unless the judge would like to announce that too? No? Fine. Well, it's another 0 out of 10, I'm afraid. Ain't nothing right about this clip. And to the makers of Corrie, I'm right here, just up the road. I'm available for a rate you won't find objectionable. You see what I've done? Yeah? No, never mind. Fine. Onwards. Clip 5, the sublime and not always silly Silk. Starring professional northerner Maxine Peake as the eponymous Queen's Counsel, although of course she'd be King's Counsel if it were set now.
The defendant lives a short distance away from the scene of the crime, and you arrested him because there's CCTV footage of a man on a Vespa leaving from outside Mr. Dodd's home address just after the burglary took place.
The trial of a Vespa-owning defendant who may or may not have done a burglary.
The defendant owns a Vespa. The footage isn't good enough for us to identify it 100%, but...
Grounds for suspicion, grounds for arrest.
Yeah.
Grounds for suspicion and arrest. OK, not unreasonable so far.
Was any of the stolen property recovered from the defendant's flat?
A word about this judge. He is a red judge. That is to say, a High Court judge sitting in the Crown Court in this instance. I'm not sure his lordship, red judges get that honorific, is dressed entirely properly, but it might just be a scruffy costume department.
No.
Any paraphernalia associated with burglary?
These things are easily disposed of.
Stick to the evidence, officer, not supposition.
It's supposition based on 25 years of experience.
Nothing found in the search, but the officer points out that such things are disposable, and that's true. But he's chastised a little by the Mancunian maverick for not sticking to facts. The officer fires back with his experience, and assuming he's not making that up, he's entitled to respond that way. But it might not look great before the jury. Officers are not there to secure a conviction, they are there to present evidence. They can give evidence pertaining to the investigation and can qualify those answers, but can also expect counsel to use such answers as an illustration of a lack of impartiality.
Then came the ID parade and slam dunk. You haven't been in court until now, so you won't know what Mr. Dodd said in the witness box. But you will have heard about the yawn moment.
A few things here. 1, put the bloody pen down, it's distracting. That's certainly what bar students would be told. Number 2, slam dunk from the ID parade, eh? Well, that's just building on the hint at a copper lacking impartiality, but it's also commentary. That is not allowed. Number 3, the yawn moment. Well, lawyers will know where this is going, but this is a build-up to a pop at the officer. Dangerous, though, letting the officer give what is basically part of a prosecution closing speech.
It's chilling. I torture an old man and then yawn. Well, was he bored? Tired?
And this is the kind of behaviour you'd expect from this defendant.
Do you have any idea what you're doing, Miss Costello?
But a real judge would have seen this coming a mile away. Obviously, Miss Costello knows that she is setting up a you know and dislike this punter, and you set out to make sure his face fitted because of his previous offendings thing.
Is it right that this defendant has previous convictions? Including 3 previous convictions for burglary?
Yes.
And, well, can you tell us about the sentences Mr. Rush received for those offences?
Probation the first time, 80 hours community service the second time, followed by 6 months in prison.
And 25 years of experience. How do you feel about those sentences?
Too short.
So this voice of the people copper has opinions about the defendant having 3 previous for burglaries, which would be going into evidence anyway in this case. We don't have all of the needed information here, but 6 months custody for the 3rd burglary. If it was a 3rd strike domestic burglary, then it's a minimum 3-year prison sentence. It can be more. It can be a little less, although you get less than a 1/3 reduction even on an early guilty plea, and you can avoid the 3 strikes minimum in genuinely exceptional circumstances.
In 25 years of experience, if a man yawns and puts his gloved hand up to his mouth, then with the same hand opens a door using the handle, what will we find on the handle? DNA.
Ooh, a bit of forensic analysis, but why ask the copper? Let's watch.
Where is it? Who was the first officer to arrive on the scene of the crime?
I was.
And this was before Socco's, long before forensics had got to the flat. When the door handle was tested, were any fingerprints found?
No.
So, none? A door handle with nobody's prints on it? Not Mr. Dodds? Not the social worker from an hour before?
Skipped over the DNA a bit quickly there, and no fingerprints on the handle. A door handle with no prints on it would indeed be a very strange thing. So, you guessed where we're going, right? He's been at it with the Mr. Sheen and a cloth, hasn't he?
See, Mr. Dodd couldn't have been clearer. The intruder yawned. He put his gloved hand up to his face to cover his yawn. He opened the door with the same hand using the handle.
Not an answer to be heard. This is turning into a speech. It's nice, but it's not cross-examination.
Gather up all your experience, officer. Bring it to the front of your mind and park it next to your anger and tell this jury that someone didn't wipe the handle clean before it was tested. You fitted up this defendant because you don't like him. He's got form, and in your policeman's mind, he hasn't been properly punished.
So how did Mr. Dodd pick him out then?
And there's the mic drop from our Lanx lass. But then the officer remembers how to speak.
Eh?
That's a question from a witness. She's free to ignore it, but, and I don't remember all of the evidence in this episode, I'm going to guess that the witness was able to pick the defendant out of an ID parade because he was tipped with a wink or shown an image of the defendant by this bent Bobby. Verdict time. Not guilty for this defendant, and a pretty solid 8 out of 10 for this clip. And that's it for this episode of Objectionable. Remember, don't share your legal problems in the comments. Don't get legal advice from YouTube or TikTok, even if it's us. There's more to this malarkey than you might think, and all cases are different. If you enjoyed this and have clips to suggest to producer Mark, stick them in the comments or get in touch. And a big thank you from both of us to those who have liked and shared and such. It takes a second to do, and it's good for us because the bigger audience, then the longer we'll be able to keep doing all of this sapping fun out of film and TV.